Welcome to the Chapter 3 video of Traceable Requirements Capture. This video will focus on the test and use cases to validate that the final parts meet all the applicable requirements. The fundamental difference between use and test cases is that the use cases are intended for functional requirements for product, whereas the test cases are for technical requirements. The use cases are tested by user interaction and tend to be more qualitative. Test cases, on the other hand, offer very specific quantitative requirements such as weight, cost, or size. This diagram shows the overall hierarchy of requirements, test cases, use cases, and finally, test executions. Use and test cases are stored as children to the requirement to which they are testing. Furthermore, use cases can be broken down to include test cases in some situations. For example, a laptop is to have a high-quality screen approved by the client. This qualitative requirement, high quality, can be simplified by including the technical requirements of a specific screen resolution and refresh rate. Lastly, the test executions record each iteration of a test and feed the results back up to the respective test or use case. First of all, the requirements must be promoted to the frozen state to prevent it from being changed after the test or use cases are created. Test cases define the technical requirements for product as well as listing the testing process to follow to ensure the product meets that requirement. Use cases are intended to define the functional requirements for product. These functional requirements can sometimes be further broken down into technical requirements, and these technical requirements are then checked with a test case as a child of the overarching use case. To link a test case as a child of a use case, go to the use case space and select Create or Add Existing. Even if test cases are children to use cases, each technical requirement must have its own test case. We'll now go back to 3D Experience and demonstrate these first 4 steps. Once we are ready to start defining our test and use cases, we begin the requirement specification. For this demo, we're going to use the main beam's maximum weight requirement, and the first step is to move this from the in-work state to the frozen state. Promoting requirements was covered in one of our earlier videos, and individually can be done from the main beam's maximum weight and simply saying mass promote. Once our requirement is frozen, we now enter into the requirement space in order to start creating our test cases. Go over to the categories section and go to related objects. This page will display all of the items that are related to the main beam's maximum weight. In this case, we have the actual requirement, its parent specification, and the main beam model B that we created in the previous video. To start creating test cases, we go up to the Test Cases tab, go to the Action button and select Create. And we now define the important information for our test case. In the Content section, it is important to state any and all information with regards to the test procedure, test limitations, and acceptance criteria, and state a planned completion date for our tests. We can now create a use case in the same manner. The requirement we're dealing with is the main beam's maximum weight, so this does not really apply to use cases very well, but for the sake of this demo, we'll create one anyway. We are currently in the main beam's maximum weight requirement space, and the next step is to link the test and the use cases. This is done from the use case space, which we open by clicking on the use case item. To link the test case, we then go to the Test Cases category, go to the Action button, and say Insert Existing. As before, 3D Experience will automatically select the test case type on the left, and we now select the test case we're interested in, and say OK. The test case we created is now linked as a child to the use case. We will now go back to our presentation and detail the next several steps. Test cases define the test parameters, procedure, and acceptance criteria. This information is then fed down to the test executions where the test is actually performed. It is good practice to define one test execution for each iteration of the tests so that all tests are recorded regardless of their pass or fail results. Once the test has been completed in reality, the results are to be detailed in the test execution and the percentage passed to be updated. When the test execution has met a suitable pass percentage, the part is deemed a success and has met the stated test requirement. We then move on to validating the test case. Validation of the test case is not done from the test case itself, but rather from the test execution that received the suitable pass. Remember that test cases feed the requirement, procedure, and acceptance criteria down to the test execution. Validation works in the opposite manner, as the validation is declared in the test execution, and this validation is then fed back up to the test case. With this structure in mind, the validation parameter is modified in the test execution space. Now we promote the test execution to the released state to indicate that the tests have been completed and the requirements have been validated. Doing so will automatically promote the test case to released as well. And we will now return to our live example. We are now back at the requirement specification page. To create a test execution, we must reopen the test case, and we do this by going back to our requirement, selecting the test case, and opening our test case space. We then select the test executions category and click on Create New. The creation window now appears on the right-hand side, and we start by inputting a title for our test execution. In the description section, we input all of the important information from our test. This can include information such as when and where the test was performed, who was present, as well as any irregularities that we may have encountered during the testing stage. Then create the test execution by saying create and close. We must now modify the percentage passed for this test. We do this by clicking on the Edit button and changing the percentage passed from 0 to 100. We then save and move on to the test case validation. We do this from the respective test execution and so have to open the initial item. Go to the category section at the side and test cases. We then go back to Edit and change the result from not validated to validation failed, or in this case, passed. Again, save. Once saved, the final step is to promote the test execution from the in-work state to frozen, and then from frozen to released. We have now covered all the primary aspects of the testing phase. By this stage, we have captured the requirements from the client, they have been discussed and revised as needed, and we have validated that the final product meets all of these requirements.